You know that I was thinking I was thinking about sexism, right?
Uh-huh.
And how, you know, for years women have fought against sexism, and everyone was really sexist towards women, but like today, I think it's actually gone the other way a bit. Like I used to be able to aggressively howl at women and slap their ass in the streets, and for some reason I'm not allowed to do that anymore. That's weird.
We're merely soldiers in petticoats. Something, something for women's votes. Though we adore men individually, we agree that as a group they're rather
Is
stupid.
this Mary
Cast off the
Poppins?
shackles of
Yes, it is.
yesterday, shoulder to shoulder into the fray. Our
Daughters,
daughters
daughters
will
will
adore
adore us,
us. And
and
they'll
we'll
sing
sing
in
in
grateful
faithful
chorus.
chorus.
Well done,
Bum,
Sister
bum, bum, bum,
Suffragette.
bum, bum.
Sorry. Yes, that was fun.
Hello, and welcome to something that we're doing.
I want to ride my chocobo all day. We're talking about something that I wanted to talk about for a while. Video games. I want to talk more about video games on this channel and on this little thing that we do and with you. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about a video game.
So, I don't know if you guys are aware, but in the year of our Lemmy, 2020, someone ate a bat, and then they gave everyone the super flu. Now, this was kind of a big deal because everyone had to stay indoors. On paper. In practice, very few people did. But I did. And something that I did with my significant other was play through a couple Final Fantasy games. We started with 7, then we did 15, then we did 9, then we did 8. And I fully voice acted all of Final Fantasy 7. That way, my significant other wouldn't have to be constantly looking at the screen to get the story. So I fully voice acted Final Fantasy VII with a unique voice for every character. And then after we were done with that, the prospect of doing that all again for another 40 hours with Final Fantasy IX, I kind of wanted to have a little break from it, so we did 15 in the middle. So, what was your experience with the Final Fantasy series prior to 15?
Well, that's a really good question. I think you had told me about that before, but it didn't like nest in my mind. So, good on you for doing that. That's a really cool way to go about it. I can totally understand why you would want a fully voiced game after that. My history with the Final Fantasy series is very, very limited. To this day, the only ones that I have played all the way through are 15 and the Final Fantasy VII remake. Um, I have played most of 7, but I got to a place in that game where I just got very frustrated and I couldn't finish it. Our JRPGs from that time period, not just Final Fantasy, but Dragon Quest or what
I'm
have
going
you,
to
anything
interrupt you.
else.
Audience, what happened was he got lost and couldn't work the map, and as we all know, men don't ask for directions. That's what happened. He just got lost.
But except that I asked you for directions.
I mean, I gave you directions. It's not like I put you in a barrel and said, find the corner.
No, you gave me directions, but it was still hard to figure it out, and I just can't fuck with that kind of stuff. Anything involving a little vehicle that you get and a map that doesn't have like quest indicators, this is why modern games have what we call quality of life improvements. Because anything like that, I have no patience for it. I'm going to be 42 years old in January. I don't have time to aimlessly wander around a map that looks like MapQuest from 2006 and try to figure out where the game is telling me to go. So that was one of the issues that I had with 7. Great game though, for what it was. But regarding 15, that's a game that I also played during the pandemic, where I did also stay at home, even though, as you say, very few people did. And there's a little title that comes up when you start that game that says a Final Fantasy game for, it's something like newcomers and old timers alike, or something like that. Basically it'll appeal to longtime fans as well as newcomers. Well, I was definitely a newcomer. I had played the first Final Fantasy on the NES. I believe that was a rental one weekend. And remember, I said I'm turning 42 in January, so that's how far back I go.
You fossil.
Yep, exactly. And it's getting worse, and it's going to get worse, unfortunately. But it was a little too complicated and sophisticated for however old I was at the time, so I didn't think much of it. And I played the first game again, the mobile version of it, when it came out on mobile like a decade ago, and it was cool. But 15 was definitely my first real, like, serious attempt at getting into the series. And I have to say, I don't know how it came off to the traditional Final Fantasy fan, because I don't know very many traditional Final Fantasy fans. But it definitely made me want to get into the series, and I definitely thought that it was good, and based on what I knew about the turn-based games of the past, it seemed like a very efficient way of sort of rebooting that playstyle in a modern game and allowing new people in. So without getting into the deep dive about the characters and the story and the combat system and all that, which I'm sure we will, I really, really liked it as a video game.
I don't like it.
You actually didn't like it overall?
No, I can't. I can't because what this game does well is wholly unique to this game. There is no other game that does what this game's best features do. And you're never doing it. So originally, I was like, I love the driving and cruising around with friends, and I like this sort of atmosphere of kind of being on holiday. And I don't like anything else about this game. But the thing is that the parts of the game that I do like, which is I like the sort of the sightseeing, sort of virtual tourism aspect of it, and the sort of carefree, you're out with the lads on a road trip kind of thing. Though I like that, that is made worse too, because it's in Final Fantasy 15. And Final Fantasy 15 drops the ball faster than any game I've ever played that wasn't outright just fully bad. I don't think this is a bad game, but I don't like it. Like, well, I'm sure we're going to get into this, but like my very short version of events is that I don't really like this game because everything I like about it feels out of place. I love cruising about with Gladio and Iggy, and I would hold Prompto's head in a bucket of water until the last bubble came up. But the other two, I like hanging out with them, and I like driving, and I like the camping, and I like stopping out to get photographs, and I like that the characters' conversations feel quite real. But it's all out of place because Noctis's dad just fucking died in tragic circumstances, and they're meant to be getting somewhere for the sake of the nation. So when they're just out and they're like, you know, Disneyland's just up the road, should we take a look? Yeah, you know what, why not? And then they're riding Space Mountain while meanwhile the city has fallen. It all feels out of place. But I don't want to go any further than that because I don't want to take the steering wheel too much off of you and sort of step on your toes with what you
No,
had to say.
no. That's really good. No, and I fully agree with a lot of that. So let me just sort of set it up here because you and I have talked about this in the past for the benefit of the audience who I hope has played this. If they haven't, the premise of the game, or what you believe the premise of the game is when you start it, is that Noctis is the prince of, I don't even remember what the kingdom is called. He's the prince of a kingdom, and his father's the king, obviously. And he is betrothed to a woman from a separate kingdom. And their arranged marriage is going to lead to greater peace and stability in both kingdoms. The Noctis and his betrothed knew each other as children, but they haven't seen each other in years and years and years and years and don't really know each other. So the apparent plot of this game is that Noctis has to travel from his kingdom to his betrothed with his bodyguards and assistants who are his friends who are around the same age, and it's a road trip, right? The premise seems to be that this is going to be a road trip from his kingdom to his betrothed's kingdom with his buddies, and that along the way they're going to get in adventures, and that's what the actual game is going to be. And that is at once the best setup for a game like this, a fantasy game that I've ever seen. And the fantasy elements are so perfectly mixed in this game with the 1950s American road trip aesthetic, which is what this game uses. And it's incredible. 5 minutes after they get on their road trip, Dad's kingdom is overthrown and destroyed, and his father is killed. So now it's not a road trip to get to his betrothed anymore. Now the kingdom is in dire peril. And I was thinking, in fairness to what Andrew was saying, why didn't they do that at the end of the game? Why didn't he get to where you do the road trip and everything's fine and you're having adventures, and then you get to right before you get to your betrothed, then the kingdom is invaded? Why on earth are you doing this now? Because as you say, now anytime they go out of their way to hunt a monster or to look at something, you're thinking, you don't have time for this. The king is dead. So that was an absolutely horrendous dropping of the ball when it came to that setup. My strategy for getting around that when I played it was I pretended it hadn't happened, and then I was going to pretend it happened at the end. That's the only way that I was able to emotionally keep that game going. So you are absolutely correct when it comes to that.
I think it spoils I think it spoils a very good setup as well, which is that Final Fantasy had never done this before. What this aesthetic they had never done before. Final Fantasy had done medieval, it had done cyberpunk, and it had done sort of nondescript kind of futuristic. It had never done essentially modern day. Final Fantasy 15 has this very traditional, almost medieval style plot. An arranged marriage between two kingdoms to stop a conflict. This happened in medieval times all across Europe, and I'm sure in Asia as well. It's a great setup, and an interesting setup, because they have this old, antiquated idea in the only Final Fantasy game that has been set in what is clearly modern day. This isn't futuristic, not really. There are elements to it that are futuristic, but the regalia, the car, that's a very, very 2010s modern car. The clothes they're wearing are just sort of normal, like stylish, but like normal clothes that people wear. Their hairstyles, normal hairstyles. The towns, the villages, they just seem like modern places with history, sure, but everything is, compared to other Final Fantasy games, very grounded, but there's monsters. And I've heard it said before by other commentators that this modern aesthetic actually ends up being a bit of a problem because there's giant monsters in this world, yet the towns have got seemingly no defense for them and just look like regular Earth towns. But like that aside, I think it squanders what this game could have done really well, and at times does do well, which is take this medieval setup, put it in a modern setting, and then they could have kind of had a road trip, sort of juxtaposing like kind of a medievalish sort of journey goal, but with quite a modern journey of these friends going out sightseeing, you know. And I'll get onto my pitch later for what I personally would have done had I been in charge of this game. Arrogant of me, I know. But yeah. I think that the problem with this game was that no one seemed to know what to do with it. At one point in time, the director of this game wanted it to be a musical, and I don't understand how that would have worked unless it turned into SingStar or a rhythm game at points, but he wanted the game to be a musical. Good luck filling a 25-hour game with musical numbers, but you do you, then maybe that's why it didn't happen. But this game didn't seem to have very much goal or focus. And I'm pretty sure this is what you were probably about to say, then it expects you to be familiar with the movie they made, TV series, web series, Lunchbox, special limited edition pamphlets that come with the Final Fantasy 15 socks that you might buy to understand what is even going on in the plot anyway. So somehow they take what is such a simple setup, and not only do they sort of drop the ball by having the king die way too soon, like immediately after they get out there, but what sort of story and lore is there is taken away, and the entire sections of the game are cut away and repackaged as DLC. So when each of those characters goes off and they've got their own little mini story arcs, not only is that only available through DLC, but it's a problem that it's DLC because it affects their behaviour in the games. When Prompto starts acting weird and nervous, no one knows why, because they want you to buy the DLC so that you can see the chapter where he finds out that he's a replicant. Like, yeah. I'm just going to hand it over to you.
Well, I haven't played any of the DLCs yet, so thanks for the spoiler.
Well, you should have thought about that before you did this.
A replicant? What does that mean?
That was it. He was a replicant. He was like some sort of clone or android or something like that. Oh, and he finds that out in the DLC. And that's why when he comes back into the story, he's kind of shaken up.
Well, that's incredibly stupid because I thought Prompto, I completely disagree with you about Prompto. At least I guess I don't disagree with you because we're just talking about our feelings about things. But Prompto, to me, he was the character that I related to the most because he has imposter syndrome. And one of the things that I loved about that guy is that the reason that he is the way he is... Hold on a second, I've got cat anarchy going on here.
Meownarchy. He's had to go and wrangle a cat, and I want all of you to know that I would not piss on Prompto if he were on fire. I would get the kerosene, and I would throw more of it onto Prompto. Prompto is, to me, that weird guy at the skate park who's always trying to have sex with 15-year-olds, and he's 22. That's Prompto to me. He looks like that. He acts like that. He is that. I would fire Prompto directly into the sun. There is very little in this world, on God's green earth, that I hate more than Prompto. If I knew Prompto, and the thing is I have known Promptos. If I knew Prompto, I would cyberbully him. And I'd cyberbully him a lot. Every day, Prompto would get up and he would check his phone, and it would just be he'd check his DMs, and there'd be me putting the middle finger up to him in a picture that I would even take on, not on my phone, but on like my Canon DSLR. I would take a photograph of that. I would use a vintage lens. I would get it perfectly in focus, and then I would flip him off, take the photograph, and send it to him. Because to me, hating Prompto is not just an opinion, it's an art, it's a way of life. It would make everything feel right. Prompto to me is pestilence. I have spent almost as much time thinking about all the different ways that I would bully Prompto as Gabriel has wrangling this one cat that he apparently is just being mauled by right now. But yeah, not really a fan of Prompto. You know what, while we're on the topic of this little pencil-necked shrimp...
Okay, so here's my monologue about why I like Prompto, and why I think that him being some kind of replicant or robot or something is incredibly stupid, because unlike Gladio, who, you know, I liked well enough, he was sort of for those of you who know anything about Thundercats, to me he was sort of the Tigra or the Lion-O of the group. He was just sort of like, he's big and he fights things and he says gruff things. Yeah, and that's about it. Not very deep. And I really liked Ignis because he's sophisticated and he just seems like he's like the Alfred of the group.
The mum friend, as my significant other called him.
Aha, yes. Prompto is different from... What?
Prompto is pestilence.
I do not think that Prompto is pestilence. I think that Prompto is different from the other two in that he wasn't highborn. He doesn't have the sort of like imperial training or anything that the other two have, and he feels very out of place. He's there first and foremost because he's Noctis's friend, and Noctis wants him along because he's his friend, and he knows that he's not as adept as the other two, and he talks about that. And I just thought that was such a refreshing change of pace from the other two. And I when he talked about feeling like he didn't belong there, and Noctis talked to him about why he did, I really liked those dialogue sections, and I really liked what they did, that dynamic between those two. So that's what I liked about Prompto.
Do you know why I would run Prompto over in the Regalia?
No, tell me.
Apart from the fact that he is all those things that I said in my monologue about why I would cyberbully him. Prompto, from a game mechanics standpoint, was just never where I needed him to be. So for me, there was the added thing of like, right, Prompto already kind of annoys me because he reminds me of those 22-year-olds that hang around skate parks by local schools and try to have sex with 15-year-olds that think that they're cool. Apart from the fact that he reminded me of that, there was the fact that Gladio was where I needed him to be at all times. Ignis was always kind of around, and if I needed backup, I would be in danger, fighting some bad guys, and then I could really use a guy with a ranged weapon. But Prompto has, I guess, seen a butterfly, and he's gone. He was completely. I appreciate that from a narrative standpoint, he is not as competent as the other two. But fuck me, Square, there was a limit. He was not incompetent compared to the other two. He was just not there. He was not present. I'd look around and I wouldn't know where he is. That's another thing that got me with Prompto.
That I never had that happen to me. I never had any of the... You mean during combat? I never had any of the characters...
To be fair, this is probably just how it ended up being on my playthrough. I don't
that's fair enough, and that's your...
Yeah.
No, that was your experience of the game. That's totally valid. I just didn't have that happen to me. None of the characters ever were missing from in action when I was fighting. So that, yeah, no, I get
he
you though.
would
That's a
walk in, and he would get smacked, and he'd immediately be down. And okay, you know what? I'm not even gonna use a Phoenix down on you. There's no point, because the second I do, you're just getting banged out again.
Yeah, I don't think so. This is weird. In most games like this, certainly in the Final Fantasy VII Remake, this was true. In most games like this, and I hadn't thought about this before you said it, I usually have a party member that's the most efficient at combat, and I usually have a party member that I want to keep out of it because they're not. I didn't have that in this. It all seemed to be fairly equal. Maybe this is a good segue into talking about the combat system, because for me, the way that you would chain between you're attacking something and then Gladio does his thing, and then Prompto does his thing, and then Ignis does his thing, that system always worked as efficiently as I could make it work for me, which is about the only way that you can describe it, because that combat system is
dog shit.
in the it's I like what it was trying to do, and the more I used it, the more I got used to how I didn't get used to it. I got used to the way that I could make it do what I wanted it to do, but it's fairly incomprehensible. It doesn't work for what they were going for. And if you compare it to the Final Fantasy VII Remake, I think they clearly said, okay, this was a good idea. We need to actually implement it in a way that's comprehensible to the player, and did it in the 7 remakes. The 7 remakes, part action, part real-time thing, worked flawlessly.
What they did was they went, okay, Kingdom Hearts, should we just do Kingdom Hearts again? That's what they did with Final Fantasy VII. It's not exact, obviously. It is a different system, but what annoys me with Final Fantasy 15's combat, apart from the fact it is just like hold down button to win, there aren't like it's just you don't have to tap, you just hold that button, and it just does a never-ending combination. But apart from that, what annoys me with it is the fact that they had already done this. They've done plenty of Kingdom Hearts games. They've done too many Kingdom Hearts games. They know how to combine the elements that from turn-based RPGs with a real-time action combat system, with a party that are always fighting in real time with you, because Sora, Donald, and Goofy have been doing it for years. They knew how to do these things. They just unlearned it and then relearned it for Final Fantasy VII. That's what I find so frustrating. Yeah.
Well,
and to be fair, like, I'm not going to go 7 remake perfect and Final Fantasy 15 is the donkey, because Kingdom Hearts combat is better than both of them. So they haven't got back to that standard, but
so I only ever played the first Kingdom Hearts game, and I didn't care for the combat in that one, and I liked the combat in 15 for what I was able to do with it, and I really liked the combat in 7. So for me, that was a little bit different, and I didn't really find those systems to be all that similar between any of them. I found the 7 system to be just a polished version of the 15 system more than it didn't really remind me of Kingdom Hearts. Kingdom Hearts reminded me more of I don't even know, just Kingdom Hearts.
I'll say though, because we kind of skipped over the characters a bit. We just sort of slagged off Prompto. Well, I slagged off Prompto, and you went, "No, he's a precious boy."
Well, I didn't say he's a precious boy. I said he had interesting characteristics that I didn't think the other two had. He had a unique.
This is where the hate train continues for me. Sorry, guys. So I like Gladio, and I like Ignis. I don't like Noctis, and I don't like Prompto. Now, for me, Final Fantasy games have always had a little bit of a thing where the main protagonist has often been the least interesting character in the group. Final Fantasy VIII's got that problem with Squall, and I think 9 has it with whatever the monkey boy's name was. It's completely gone out of my head. Had it with him as well. So Noctis, I found to be it's kind of a piece of wood. I've already spoke about Prompto. I like Gladio and Ignis. I like that Gladio is basically... Because a lot of people go, Gladio's fine until the midway point and then he becomes unbearable. No, he's angry for one chapter and then he calms it down. But he's completely within his right to be mad because Noctis has got to get his shit together, and unfortunately he ends up being the friend that just kind of has to be tough on him. But what I was going to say is Final Fantasy 15 has got the smallest party of any Final Fantasy game. Every other mainline Final Fantasy game had a party that eventually got so big that you would rotate out who you have.
Yeah.
This game never does that. You have these 4 guys and you've got them the entire game. And I just think it's crazy that Final Fantasy IX balanced 8 characters than Final Fantasy 15 balanced 4. I feel like they don't really get much development. I know there's the DLCs. I can't with that. Like in the game that people paid money for initially, I don't think they really get any development. Is it Lady Luna Freya? Is that who Noctis was going to marry?
Luna Freya, that's it, yes.
We don't really know anything about her.
Ever.
And we don't even really understand whether or not Noctis actually even loves her. We don't really know anything about them other than what you can infer because you have to infer.
Have to.
Like,
yes.
I do agree with what you say about Prompto with a bit of imposter syndrome because he's a fucking loser. But the thing is that you do have to infer from what little is there. And I know people will say, well, show, don't tell. But I don't feel like, other than, to be fair, Noctis we do see go through some trials and tribulations. I felt like the 2 best character moments in this game both involve the car. I love the opening of the game where Stand By Me is playing and they're having to push the regalia to a mechanic. That's a very funny and subversive way to start out a Final Fantasy game because they've never done modern day before. That was a great way to sort of introduce all the characters and the differences between them, and you get so much personality. And the other is when the regalia gets blown up. And even me, as someone that doesn't give a passing shit about cars, I felt sad when the regalia got blown up because of the adventures that I had tried to have in it, and that I recognised that it meant a lot to the boys because it was given to them by the king, and they'd had their adventures and their sightseeing tour in the car, and then eventually the regalia gets the heroic sacrifice first. But I felt like, but other than those 2 real moments, I felt like, here's what I felt like. I felt like I had gone to California to visit you, and you had said, I'm so glad you're coming. We're going to go on a 2-week road trip all around California, and we're going to see all of the sights. We're going to see the mountains, the deserts, the big redwood forest. We're going to see the lot of it. It's going to be me, and it's going to be you, and it's going to be 3 of my friends. And I'm like, cool. And I'm on this road trip, and everyone's nice. I get on with everyone, but I always felt distant from everyone. And I feel like that is a feeling that this game should not allow you to have. Not this game. Some games and some stories can do that, where you feel like you never really got to know the characters because there's an artistic point to be made. This game, crucially, I felt like I should love the characters. This should be a game that is so about the characters. It's such a small cast for a Final Fantasy game. The kind of story it feels like they want to tell about a band of brothers, and I don't feel that they begin to tell that story. That's how I felt with the characters. And I say, I like Iggy and Gladio.
So yeah, just to sort of back up what you're saying, I'm always reminded of a line in Faulty Towers where Basil calls the guy who's supposed to be building their wall, and he tells him, instead of dumping the bricks in the pile, I thought you were going to cement them together. And I feel like in this game, instead of dumping these bricks in a pile, they should have found time to cement them together. I liked Prompto because he was unique, and I think his imposter syndrome was acknowledged and talked about in it, which made that a pretty good element. Gladio, I don't understand why anybody would have a problem with the period of the game where he has to get tough with Noctis, because what you said was absolutely right, and that was part of the story. I don't understand how that makes him insufferable, and you're right, it didn't go on for that. It didn't seem to go on that long for me. Ignis, I felt that there was so much more to that character that we didn't see, that was like in his sort of like him to Alfred again, where he's very mysterious and he has more ability than he lets on, but they never really capitalized on that. I had very mixed feelings about Noctis. On the one hand, he is again, a very Tigra, Lion-O sort of, okay, he's the hero and that's about all he is kind of thing. And
I don't like fighting against him on Tekken.
I didn't know he was in Tekken. I don't play Tekken.
Yeah, he's a guest character on Tekken, and he's a bloody nightmare.
Oh,
especially
shit,
if you're not very good at it, like I'm not.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, well that sucks. But yeah, and he was also a sort of brooding goth sad boy, as I was when I was in high school, so I could relate to that a little bit. He had moments where I felt that if they had cemented these bricks together, could have been really standout moments for him. He was the only one who I felt he didn't change at the end of the game, but who I felt had moments where, if they had written this thing properly, could have had an arc at the end of the game. There are things that he deals with emotionally that the voice actor tries to convey. The death of Lunafreya was one of them. He has moments that were actually standout moments that seems like he's having emotional sort of epiphanies. He doesn't have those, but he's the guy's trying to do that because the game doesn't allow it. So I had very mixed feelings about him. So I guess my tally there is I kind of liked all of them. There was of all the ones, I think Gladio was the one that I cared about the least. And I guess Ignis was the one I cared about the most, because for all that I've said about Prompto, I didn't really care about him because those were very, very brief moments in an otherwise very long game, and they never address any of these things. So, there's that. Maybe since we're coming to the end of this thing, maybe we should talk about the sort of ending, which I felt that there's a character in the game, and I can't remember his name. I'm just going to call him the guy with the hat.
It's probably Sid.
And what is it?
It's probably Sid, right? The old dude.
Yeah.
There's always a Sid in these games.
Yeah. So, this guy, as I sit here now, I don't know what his motivation was, other than stopping them or fucking with them. I don't know exactly. Guy? Yeah.
Oh no! You know what? I don't even remember. I don't remember.
The guy with the hat, the guy with the scarf.
Yeah, that dude.
The guy you fight at the end badly. I don't know what he wanted. I don't know what his angle was. I don't know why he was as powerful as he was. Well, going back to and that's because
But
of
if you've
exactly what
watched
you
the
said before.
movie,
Yeah, if you watch the movie and all this other stuff, and you know what? I'm cool with that sometimes, but okay, you had this very simple thing. The only thing that I was invested in was that road trip angle that we discussed before. The fact that you had to watch the movie and the anime and the comic books and all this stuff in order to know who any of these people were or how any of the stuff relates to each other or what the kingdoms are. Of course I'm not going to do that. And how does that jive with what they said about being a good game for newcomers? I'm not going to give a shit about that. I don't give a shit about that. So when I'm picking up these things that give me all this backstory in the game, it's like, well, I'm not going to read this either. I didn't watch your anime. You think I'm going to stop and read this?
I think my rule.
No.
I think my rule for expanded material is and this is a me thing, I do not like canon expanded material that you need to understand a story if it leaves the medium that the story was told in. So say, for example, if I want to know why Barry has a pitchfork to do his farming when before he only had a hoe, I'm fine with there being a short film, or like let's say it was a film. I'm fine with there being like a little short film that shows you how he got the hoe, or like a prequel for how he got the hoe, or something, or the rake rather, pitchfork. Doesn't matter. I'm fine with that. What I'm not fine with is when I have to leave the medium that that story takes place in. If Final Fantasy 15 had a game that kind of had patched those things together more, I would be more okay with it. I wouldn't be okay with it because it's still an inherent problem to this game that half the story is not in the game. But I don't like when they want me to leave the medium of video games to watch a film. And I would feel the exact same way that if Final Fantasy 15 was a film and then they went, in order to understand this, you've got to play the video game.
A video game,
no.
yeah. No, I fully agree with that.
This
I heard a lot of that.
I'm sorry, I've just a little mini rant. This is also
Sure.
This is also why, until very recently, I never entertained the idea of playing any of the Final Fantasy games other than the first and second one, because they wanted you to because they were all console exclusives. Like the PS1, the first two games were on the PS2, or the first two console games, but the second game released was a Game Boy exclusive. Then they did a 3DS exclusive, and they did a PSP exclusive, and you had to play all of, and they expected you, this is a Square problem, they expected you as the consumer, if you were a Kingdom Hearts fan, to buy every console on the market in order, and that was the real problem for Final Fantasy, and that was the real problem for Kingdom Hearts before they finally caved and released Kingdom Hearts: The Story So Far, which had everything that they ever did prior to Kingdom Hearts 3 on a PS4 disc.
Yeah. With the exclusion and Kingdom Hearts, my understanding is that there is actually lost media involved in that too, so they couldn't have included that. They fucked it up so badly.
I would not doubt.
Yeah, my understanding is that there was
a.
So as I understand it, there was a mobile game that you could only play through the server, and it was only active for a few years, and when they shut it down, that game no longer exists. That's my understanding, is and that's how, yeah, Kingdom Hearts is the most egregious example of what you're talking about, because there's, as I say, lost media that they couldn't include. So
15 is not as bad as that. Yeah, Final Fantasy 15 is not as bad for this as Kingdom Hearts.
It's not as bad as that, but I absolutely take your point. Yeah, and it was the same with me when people tried to tell me that when the Star Wars prequels came out that they would be good if I read these comic books, and then I did read the comic books and they were totally unrelated. They didn't do anything. But yeah, I absolutely agree with you there. Another thing I'll say is if you're even if it's within the same media, so I would be even a little bit more strict than you are, even if it's within the same media. Let's say it's a movie and you get this I want do not section off the movie that you're making into other things. If you're going to do something like that, what you can do is something like a character will say to another character, hey, how did you get this? Well, I'll say pitchfork. It's like, how did you get this pitchfork? And maybe the character that's asked the question looks at the camera and says, it's a long story or something. So it doesn't affect anything in the movie, but it's a long story could have, here's this other thing that you can look at that shows how he got the pitchfork or whatever. As don't make any mandatory demands upon the audience to get like that DLC that shows those story elements. You've already gone through the story. So what if it? You can't. I have a deeper problem with sectioning it off like that. But yeah, and in this case, fuck no, I'm not gonna watch that anime.
Well, like the I don't Insidious care. Movies, the first two Insidious movies, not the ones that came after. The first two Insidious movies were, as far as I can tell, always designed to be a two-piece. The first film has a couple I'll say open doors, because I think that's literal. Like, there's a couple scenes where, like, a door is open and it shouldn't be. And you're like, ah? And then you kind of forget about it. And then the second film fills in those gaps. Those two films were always supposed to be made like that, as far as I can gather. But your experience of the first film isn't really hampered by those things that will only be explained in the second film.
Right.
But yeah. So, like, put it back onto... Sorry, what was you going to say?
Yeah. No, I was going to say, so to tie it back into to the ending, I don't know who this guy is. I don't know what he wants. I know he probably works for another kingdom that's trying to thwart Noctis. I don't know why he doesn't just kill him. I don't really care. You fight him, and then you kill him, and then you have to go into the afterlife and kill him in the afterlife. And then my understanding was that the characters are in the afterlife forever after the game is over and the kingdom is saved. And if you think for a moment about where we started, which was buddy picture road trip, and then think of where we ended, which was convoluted international conflict, afterlife, spiritual, killing him spiritually, being in the afterlife. How on earth, why on earth did you take that nice little idea and make it this goddamn ridiculous convoluted shit?
And also, the gameplay experience of getting there is this game feels like two games sellotaped together. Because the first... I would say it's more than the first half, but I'll say the first half of this game is open world. You can ride the chocobos about the open world, and that's a lot of fun. You can drive around the pretty landscapes, and the driving is designed in a way that you can't go crazy and crash into things. It makes you a tourist, and all this stuff is great if you ignore the problems of the story kind of shadowing over it. And then the game locks down into a linear sprint towards the finish line, and you can't go back. You can't sort of branch out and explore. It's like it's go time, and
it's hallways from there on out.
Yeah, and there's a point that I can see them getting at. Like, I can see, like, well, now that it is serious, you can't be messing about driving about town. But it was always serious. It was always that serious. So those beginning bits don't work. Here was my pitch that I promised at the beginning. I've had this pitch since I played the game, and I first I first told beloved wife about it, and then I told you about it, because this is the only time so far that me and you have talked about something on this channel that we have previously discussed. My pitch for this game, if I had been in charge, and say I came in and I came in near the end of production and I could just go, stop. Here's what I would do. This game is Dude, Where's My Chocobo? What I want this game to be, what I feel like this game could have been to make it truly different from other Final Fantasy games, but also to use the one thing I think this game did well, was make the stakes smaller, have this game be the story of a stag do gone wrong. The four guys, they go out in the regalia, like you can even keep like you know, Dad's fancy sports car. They go out and they were going to go on a sightseeing tour around the country before getting across the country to the other side of the country where the wedding's being taken place. For sake of argument, Noctis is on the west coast, Luna Freya's on the east coast, and they got to drive to get there. And they decided their stag do would be a lad's holiday, going across the country, and then finally at the end getting there in time for the wedding. And then they start having to deal along the way with monsters and myth and legends. And they don't, these monsters, they don't even have to be like part of the world as we know it. You literally could have gone the Harry Potter route of they didn't even know that monsters existed and now they've got to fight them off. But the stakes can gradually get bigger and bigger and bigger, and the monsters could be trying to destroy the world, but the motivation for that is not just to save the world to stop them, but to get to the East Coast and get married. He wants to go and marry his beautiful blushing bride-to-be and his groomsmen. His lads are there to help him get there. They beat the bad guy, they save the world, and then Luna Freya, she can be there at the wedding. She's pacing. She's terrified that she's been stood up. And then they all stroll in. They're in their suits. They've got black eyes. Gladio's got a broken arm in a sling from when he did the heroic sacrifice, and it looks like he maybe died, but then he pulls it through at the last minute. You know, your action movie kind of stuff. And they stagger in. The groomsmen take their seats at the front. Noctis gets there, and Luna Freya's like, "Where have you been? What's happened to you?" And he's just like, "Oh, never say I don't love you." Credits. That's like, that's what this game, I think, and I do think, listen, I'm not a game developer, and I know that they kind of go for gameplay, but that's something that the game, it could have been. Something that uses the idea of the holiday stuff. Sorry, I'll stop talking. What was you going to say?
No, you're fine. That's exactly what I was expecting. And add to that the point, the arc of this story in your scenario, which I think is exactly what we were expecting, would have been that this guy matures through this road trip. Because what is youth? What are youthful stories? This guy is leaving, to some extent, the part of his life where he can just go on a trip like this with his friends and fight monsters and stuff, because he has this new responsibility. So he has to find that within himself. He has to find a way to let go of that and retain it to some degree in a more mature sense. And he has to figure out what he's all about as an adult to be in this, to have this responsibility. You would think that the arc of this character and the arc of this guy's life by the end of the game would have been discovering that, so that he can take his place as a man, having come out of boyhood, to accept this responsibility. Not how do we figure out how to kill this guy who nobody knows or cares who he is in the afterlife. You know what I mean?
That's why I say at the beginning that I don't like it. Because I have to acknowledge, and I think I said this to you once, The part of this game that I love is 10 out of 10. But then it's in Final Fantasy 15. And I feel like this game is the definition of squandered potential.
Yeah.
This game could have been something that I loved. But it's not. And it's not because I feel like they didn't truly know what they wanted. And I feel like it's a bit like if something I like, if there's one aspect of this game that I like and I think it's 10 out of 10, and the rest of the experience I think is like a 3 or a 4 out of 10, logic should indicate, well, surely your score should be somewhere around a 6 or a 7 out of 10 for the game. But it's not. It's not, because that one thing that I think is brilliant about this game is held down by everything else, to the point where the experience of it, it's very hard for me to recall the plot. I can tell you what 7 was about, and I can tell you what 9 was about, and I can even tell you what 8 was about. But and I'm not a hardcore Final Fantasy guy. I've played the hits, as it were. I want to play 12. Yep. I want to play 10.
I want to play 13 just to see what all the fuss was about.
Oh, it's a giant hallway.
Yeah, that's what I hear.
Yeah, like I'm not like a die-hard Final Fantasy guy. And if someone loves Final Fantasy and they really have a problem with what I'm saying, I can completely understand why someone would go, oh, well, he's only played 7 and 9. I've played more of them than that, but the point still stands. I can understand why someone might be like, oh, well, this guy's not even a fan. But I don't truly understand how this game could have been a great entry point. I don't understand how it could have been a Final Fantasy game for newcomers and old fans alike, because this game does nothing to reveal to you the sort of franchise that Final Fantasy is. And for someone that had played some of the older games, though I'm not a diehard, it didn't have the quality of storytelling that I like. And at the end of the day, Final Fantasy, at its core, Final Fantasy is supposed to be about the story. That's why it was an RPG. The series started as an RPG because the director said he didn't think he could make a good action game. He wanted to tell people a story. And the story doesn't work to the point where I can't forgive what I don't like about the gameplay. And I think the story doesn't work to the point where the road trip aspect of the game that I love is bogged down because it contextually doesn't make sense. But that's where I am with Final Fantasy 15.
Yeah.
I didn't replay it in preparation for this because Lord knows I wouldn't have the time to. But maybe
I didn't.
I'll change my mind in years to come. But 2 years out from having first played it, that's where I am with it.
Yeah. So I have played it twice, and that will. I can't say that I didn't like it when I replayed it and had fun, and I played it because I enjoyed it. The story elements aside, I did like the combat. I'm not gonna lie, I did like the combat. I liked the hold down the button and you auto attack and hold down another button and you auto dodge, because that to me was Noctis seemed powerful when he did that. I can't imagine anybody else in that world that could vaporize through attacks like that, and I thought that was really cool. Once I got the hang of it, I liked the teleport slash kind of stuff. I just really liked doing the combat. I liked the progression. I liked the cooking. I liked the way that you could buff yourself and your party.
I've come up with a new recipe.
Yeah, come up with a new recipe. Exactly. I liked the camping. The individual moments in that game. If we talk about like micro and macro stuff about the game, the micro stuff about the game, I've returned to again and again just to do it. And so I can't, although if I were to rate the game on a 1 to 10 scale, which I don't really believe in doing,
I don't
know where I put it. It definitely would be average to below. But whether or not I liked it, I would be lying if I said I didn't, just because I do. I like playing it. So to wrap up, I liked it. Andrew didn't like it. If you want to, check it out. It's on everything. The music is good, the sound design is good, the weapons feel good, the graphics for the time were really good. It was the best looking game I had played up to that
I
point,
still
that it
think
came
it
out
looks
in the year
good.
that it did. Yeah, it does still, in my opinion, it does still look good too. Yeah. So there you go. There's our thoughts on Final Fantasy 15: Return of the Chocobo.
Aranea Highwind is Bay.